You ready?
I can never see through that mirror. I don't see how you guys see.
Okay, we're going to call to order the Finance and Capital Management Committee meeting. First item on the agenda, do we take a roll? No, don't take roll? Okay. All right. First item on the agenda is the previous meeting summary. There's any corrections, addendums? No? All right. Second item on the agenda is understanding school finance. Mr. Treasurer.
All right.
All right.
Yes, Joe. Yes. Well, welcome, committee. I appreciate the opportunity and to present today and to cover some things that we've talked about before, but so it's partially for all of our edification, but it's also, I think, important to keep reminding the community and educate the community when we get opportunities to understand and know why do things happen the way they do, because it doesn't always appear to be logical, and it's easy to make an assumption that is incorrect. So we'll talk about just Finance 101 and kind of just take a quick look at the basics, which we've done before. We've never really talked about what is the difference between a budget and a 5-year forecast. They're intertwined for sure. 5-year forecast is based on the budget, but we're going to talk about why they're different and what makes them different, because I think that's really important for you as a board and the community to understand. Then we'll go back and look at the 5-year forecast that was submitted in November, and we have another submission in May. It was our 2 times a year we submit 5-year forecasts, and what we predicated the 5-year forecast on and some trends that we see. And we'll see those trends in that monthly financial report. So we'll hit some of those larger numbers. You get that each month. I also want to update you on what I know about the city APS financial update. And there are 2 issues that I think kind of fall under that category. We'll look at our investments and how they are performing. I know there was a desire to talk about a yearly calendar, and so what I would like to do is just make sure I have an understanding of exactly what you're looking for on that calendar. There is a calendar that's been uploaded, but it may or may not contain all the things that you were hopeful to receive or have on that calendar. And then, of course, last board meeting, Mrs. Sykes brought up the idea of a proclamation. So we have a rough draft of a proclamation that we can take a look at just to see if, and then talk about, well, what other things need to go with that proclamation, just so the board's aware. And then, you know, we can take that at the next board meeting, and this is just a good place to kind of trial run that and see if that is something that, if we're on the right track, essentially, of what the board would like to do moving forward. So that's where we are. Let's see here. It says not now. There we go. Okay, maybe. All right. I'm not sure why it's not moving. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. All right. Maybe if I put this in. All right. Okay. I'm not sure why it's not moving.
What's not moving?
My PowerPoint's not moving forward. Not sure why.
that jump, it's on that jump drive?
This is on my,
No, I'm saying it's the PowerPoint on this.
no,
Oh,
that's this,
the,
yeah.
let me see that.
It's
Maybe
not-
the battery's dead.
I don't know, but it's not advancing this way either.
Oh, here, let's just, your thing looks like it's frozen. Let me see.
Okay.
There you go.
Outstanding, thank you. I'm completely indebted to you, Angela. So again, it's the 29th. My name is Steve Thompson. And so let's take a look at just kind of some of the basics about understanding how schools are financed and how we move forward. And there's only a handful of us that remember 1976. I'll never forget it because I was a paper boy. And does anybody can recall how thick the newspaper was on that day? It was ridiculous. I filed a union grievance, Pat, only I wasn't in a union, but I tried. I was 12 and tried to file a grievance, but it was difficult to do. But if you remember 1976, remember the oil embargo and how long OPEC, remember that name? And the OPEC nations kind of teamed together and were artificially inflating the cost of a barrel of oil to numbers that are higher than what we even see today. They did in 1976. And additionally, they cut production. So they were limiting production, driving up the cost. And that's an actual photo. If you can see in there, that's a line to get into the gas station. And there were gas station lines because they'd run out of fuel. So that was just one piece of what was happening in 1976. Inflation, I think we were all pretty taken aback by inflation when inflation hit recently at 7-8%. Inflationary rates, it was at 20% in 1976. So much going on that was negative in the economy. But was it good or bad? Ms. Autry, I know you've heard this enough times. You already know the answer, so you are not allowed to participate. And was that good or bad for public schools, this economic situation? I think most people would assume it was bad. That would be the automatic, normal assumption, only you would be absolutely wrong. Because in 1976, prior to the passage of House Bill 920, when inflation went up, or the value of your home on a piece of paper, mind you, not for real, you couldn't really sell it, but on paper, it was rising exponentially. What also happened to your taxes to the local school district? They rose with it. So schools were absolutely flush with cash. He goes on to become a U.S. Senator, a governor of Ohio, at that time a state senator, Voinovich, mostly pinned House Bill 920. And House Bill 920 was in response to what was happening. So what it says is that whenever a levy passes, it's frozen in perpetuity forever at that collection rate. So that solved the problem for the day. And then it ends up being codified in the Ohio Constitution as well. So it would take an awful lot to overturn House Bill 920. But the unintended consequence of that was, of course, that it forced what we're dealing with from 1976 to 2023. That is school districts continually on the ballot. And it makes sense. If I told you that you're going to make whatever your salary is today, and you're going to make that a year from now, that might not be a problem. But what about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? Even if inflation stays at 3%, do the math at how you're falling behind year after year after year. And that $80,000 salary doesn't cover what it covered 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think most people would agree that, what this line represents, the green line represents, is frozen revenue. So you're flatlined on revenue. I do not care how conservative the school board is. I don't care how conservative the superintendent is. Do not care how conservative the treasurer is. Eventually, this is going to happen. And that is, our expenditures are going to exceed our revenue. And we're in deficit spending right now. And each year it gets larger and larger and larger. And there's virtually nothing you can do about it. Even if you could take all the employees and freeze their salaries and freeze their steps forever, you still would cross the axis at some point, because we can't control the cost of fuel, repairs, electricity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're in a service industry, so it's not like we can increase the cost of tuition to our school. We can't, encourage our sales force to get out there and sell more. We're service. We provide a service, and that service is free. So it really puts us in a situation. Often I'll hear, if you would run the school district like a business, you wouldn't be on the ballot. Well, there are some theories of business that apply, for sure, but we're not a business, and we don't operate and function like a business. So there's too many differences between the two. So yes, depending on what you do as a school district, we can control how quickly those axes will cross. We can delay it some, but ultimately it's going to cross. And that's what creates what's commonly called boom and bust cycles. On average, in the state of Ohio, school districts are on the ballot for new money every 4.5 years. We haven't been on the ballot for new money since 2012. I'll say that again. Average school district, 4.5 years. And we have not been on the ballot since 2012. That's good fiscal management of our resources. And what happens is, you start to deficit spend. You know you're going to go into deficit spending. You cannot balance the budget at some point. It becomes impossible. And then you start eating into your cash reserves. You get to a point where our policy says, to remind you, or to the new people to make sure you're aware, our policy says that we have to have at least 2 months of unencumbered cash carryover on hand at all times. Right now, that's about $60 million. But that goes up each year as well as our expenses rise. And we're getting perilously close to hitting close to that $60 million mark and below. And that is why we have recommended as an administration to be on the ballot this November, coming November of 2024. And we would ask for and receive more funds than what we actually need. And you'll hear some people say, why are you asking for so much money? It's the boom and bust cycle. We have to build reserves to stay off the ballot for as long as we can, be as fiscally conservative as we possibly can, and still meet the needs of a challenging, we serve an urban community with some significant challenges that we face. And it's not free. It's not free. And if we're not competitive with our salaries, we lose employees, and we struggle more than some school districts to attract good employees. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we get the best staff we can in the building, pay them fairly, yet still be fiscally responsible in that process. So we would be in a boom cycle. We're in a bust cycle right now. We pass in November, we would be in a boom. We try to stretch that for as long as possible. Yes, ma'am.
Millage amount that we're asking for?
Well, that's not been determined yet,
Okay.
but
Okay.
my recommendation would be 8.9 mils, 1.9 mils being a PI levy, which would allow us to build North High School if that's the direction we want to go. And that's as high as we've ever been able to pass before. No, it's 1.9 of that 8.9 is for the building, the rest is for general fund. Yeah, good question. Make sure I'm clear on that. That would boom us for a few years. Eventually the axis would cross. We'd be able to eat into our reserves for more years. And hopefully we could make that at least a 10-year levy cycle. That would be our goal. And that would be more than double the state average in terms of levy cycles.
Have you had a conversation with our county people to find out if there's other individuals that may be out in November for renewal or for new levy issues?
Yeah. So we met with the previous administration, Mayor Horrigan and his staff, and let them know that we believe that we would be on the ballot in November, that that's our intent. So the city is aware, although we have a meeting coming up, which we'll talk about in a little bit, with the city again to discuss two issues, and I'll cover those shortly. And the third issue to discuss with them is to remind the new administration, because obviously we don't want to be on the ballot competing with other entities if at all possible.
No, I was talking about the fiscal office in the county.
No, we have not reached out to the county yet, other than to find out dates. So they are aware that we're considering it, but we haven't made any proclamation to them at this point.
Okay, because they would have a better idea about the levies that's actually.
Yeah,
going
who
to
else
be
might be
ballot.
on, like the library system or whatever, right? Yeah, for sure.
Police office.
Yes,
Okay.
I will do that, make sure we do that. So I just want to make sure we talk a little bit about and we understand the difference between a budget and a 5-year forecast. A 5-year forecast, of course, is predicated on the budget, but a budget's established in the spring of the prior school year. So we'll be budgeting this spring for next school year, and it's only for a 1-year cycle. And it's based on projected expenditures at that time and projected revenue at that time. And we have a budget request process, so each department submits a budget request. It could be 1 year, for example, maintenance may request more money because they know they're going to put on 2 roofs, for example. Or they may request less because the year before they put on 2 roofs and this year they don't need to put on roofs. The curriculum side of the house may have a couple of book adoptions. You know, there's a, or curriculum adoption or whatever that might rise costs or not rise costs. Same with the tech side of the house. And, and for example, there are things like, the desire to go to full day, everyday preschool, which I think we all would agree is best practice. Well, but we'll have to budget for that, obviously. So this money, the word that we're trying to really stick to and get in our lexicon is that we're reassessing and redistributing these resources. It's not just because you add something over here doesn't mean overall you're spending more money necessarily. So we're reallocating those resources. Yes, ma'am.
I'm glad you said that because I think for me, the problem when we come to these finance meetings or and it's reported out is it's a lot of words being used about things overlapping and circling. And I know the last meeting, anytime I come, I ask about certain expenditures and how are we aware of what's working, what's not, like how we can trim the fat. And the calendar that you're referencing, as far as what was on it, is supposed to, the request was to show like upcoming expenditures. Like when was the last time we got vehicles?
Right.
Because then we see vehicles, buses, things that we can see that may be coming down the pipeline. So then as we're spending monies, we can better project. We probably shouldn't spend this much over here. Or when we're talking about curriculum adoption, software purchases,
Right.
and things that are not really maximizing learning experience from the perspective of maybe the teacher and the student, so that we can start cutting out these purchases and that are being made on the central office end if they're not being executed on the actual teacher end.
Right.
Because the teachers may say, hey, we switched over, and I know, Dr. Robinson, you addressed this as far as being very intentional with what we're using as far as assessing learning. So I'm aware of that. I'm just talking about before you and currently. So those are the type of things that I think we need to know to be informed when we're talking about spending money and when the community is saying things, because I'm the community too.
Sure.
And I'm asking these questions, and if I have to pay tax, my taxes are increasing. Like, okay, so what is happening, especially when as a community member, you hear things, which I addressed about garages being full of things that are being unused,
Sure.
wasted materials or auxiliary things. So
Sure.
that type of, so we really know where are we spending our money at, and how are we getting the bang for our dollar? And
Yeah.
if we're not, why do we continue to spend the money? Because we are a business. The public school, and if we look at our business affairs part of the agenda, we'll see that we, in fact, are a business. And those individual businesses see us as such because we spend a lot of money with them.
Sure.
And so that's the type of area that I want to look over and comb through and trim the fat.
Yeah, sure, and that's what Dr. Robinson's led a couple of sessions so far as we're working our way through really very similar discussion of what you just mentioned about. I don't think any school administrator brings an idea to the table that they think is bad for kids. That's not what happens. They're ideas that people believe are going to help support our students. But some support more than others, and we know that. And some are successful and some are not. So you have to do the review of that process. But ultimately, it's difficult to do because, if I brought the project to the team, I'm a strong advocate for it, and I don't want to see it go away. And so it's just a process that we're experiencing going through right now. But we know that we have to do that, and we know that if we want to reallocate or shift those resources, we know that that's what we have to do, and we're in the process of doing.
That's the word I like.
So go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
The reallocation word is the word I really like, because I think that's where it's getting gray at. Because if it's great, because we're not creating new things, we're just reallocating it somewhere else. And I think that's where it gets gray in the community, or if you're hearing it can seem like we're spending additional money. But something tangible where I can see, and it gives a clear picture to a layman person that's not necessarily in a district to see, okay, this money was being spent over here. Now they're using this to help with tutoring or reading interventions, because, something very clear, a clear picture.
Yeah, so so one of the things that we're implementing at the end of this year is to do evaluations of programs and things that we currently have, because this budget is a budget that I inherited. So that doesn't mean that we can not move things around, and we may have to, depending upon the needs that come up, such as like vehicles and those things that we did not have a plan that we're working on a refresh plan around buses, transportation, vehicles, those things. At one time we did have a refresh plan where every so many years, whether it was 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that we would purchase buses or purchase vehicles. So
it's
now,
called the refresh plan for our people watching. The refresh plan is what I was referencing, and I didn't have a word. I said calendar to show when things are up for
Yeah.
maintenance. It's the refresh plan. Thank you, Dr.
yeah,
Robinson.
so we are putting that in place, and we're going to try our best because we are off cycle, and we've been off cycle a couple of years now.
Yeah, 2 years, I think.
It may be gone. This may be the third year, but it's
might be.
definitely two
Yeah,
for
but
sure.
2 I know for sure.
That we're off cycle. So now we're going to have to we're trying to get back on cycle, which constitutes earlier this year, well, not this year, but just a couple of months ago when we had to purchase a couple of vehicles, right? They were on a cycle at one time, not on cycle. So now we're trying to put it back on cycle. The only problem is that if they were on cycle before, they probably would have been purchased over the last year or 2, maybe 3 before I even got here. But because of the condition of those vehicles, we had no choice but to bring that to the board. When it comes to like programming, whether it's iReady, but of course iReady is connected to our state report card, which is a part of our state's mandate that we have to have, whether it's going to be iReady or MAP or whatever, but we chose iReady. So we have to have that so that we are able to meet the state guidelines relative to our state report card. So the 6% increase that we received for our third grade scores in comparison to last year gave a 6% increase this year. So we have to have that. So, but those are things that we're also evaluating, and that does lend itself to have conversation with our school administrators, with our teachers, to say, hey, how is this working? What tweaks do we need to make in the implementation of certain things, whether it's professional development, whatever it is. So that's something that we would have to do in terms of in the evaluation process, but that's what accountability is going to be doing. They weren't doing that before, but that's something that I've already met with Aaron around, something that I want to make sure that we're implementing. So we will be able to show, okay, we're using iReady. Let's see if how do we know it's working? Well, we can certainly look at the data, but let's do an evaluation. It's almost like a program evaluation. Let's do that to determine if this resource that the board allowed us to purchase, if it is really yielding the dividends and the results that we had hoped for. So that's not something that we were previously doing, but it is something that we're putting in place now, so that we can evaluate those programs. So as it relates to the budget, we're going through that process even right now, where we're looking at areas that are projected, where we can do projected cuts. As we look at the budget, keep in mind we now have a blueprint. So whatever our blueprint says, that's where the money is going to be allocated. So in the blueprint, we talk about the expansion of pre-K. It's not to be confused with the universal pre-K, which I'm very much in favor of. But we're just simply expanding, meaning we're attempting to move from half day to full day, and we're still working some of those logistical things out. It may not work out as picture perfect as I would want for next year, where I would like it to be fully implemented as full day. We may have to phase it in over a 2-year period and do some full and some part-time, and then the following year do all full-time. I'd like to just do it all now, but we're working on those nuances now. But for
for budgetary reasons, we'll be able to see a clear picture on how
yes.
the money's moving, how
yes.
it's spending.
You'll be able to see the categories.
Why this became obsolete.
Yes.
Because it wasn't impactful.
Yes.
That's what
And that's going to be, so you'll be able to look at the blueprint and you'll be able to look at the budget. and it's going to be aligned.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. So moving in, and of course the budget is developed for a period of 1 year. A 5-year forecast is a bit more accurate and updated more than a budget might be, because we're already into the fiscal year, we're into the school year. It's presented, like I said, in November and in December. It's based on current actuals and historical trends. And then it's for a period of 5 years. I can tell you that the first year out, it's pretty good. Second year out, it's still pretty solid. But as you go further out, it becomes, you should look at the 5-year forecast at about year 3 through 5 as guardrails kind of dictating where your future is going to be, but not necessarily, certainly not written in stone that that's how it will end up. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the 5-year forecast, because I know so far our 5-year forecasts have not included a levy because it has not passed yet. Or we have
I
not
modeled
presented
that, and
yet.
I'm going to model that for you right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you model.
Yeah. Yeah, but when I submit a 5-year forecast, when we submit that 5-year forecast to the state, it cannot include a levy until the levy passes. So that's why whatever you vote on and gets submitted doesn't show a levy until that levy passes, for obvious reasons. So perfect segue right into the next slide. You've seen this before, but this includes reoccurring ESSER expenses coming back to general fund. These are the base assumptions of our current 5-year forecast. It's the reductions from the past administration. It includes our projected savings from closing of buildings. It updates revenue and our conversations about property values and state aid, and we saw that increase was pretty substantial. There is some legislation that could turn that back, but so far it has not passed. It assumes that we're going to continue to have declining student enrollment, because we have seen that for decades, and we have a declining, and that is, and just so people are aware, that is not something that's unique to Akron Public Schools. That's all of Northwest Ohio or Northeast Ohio. Is the entire part of the state is losing population. So suburban schools, urban schools, they're all losing student population. And with that, of course, is a reduction in state funding when that occurs. We supplanted $30 million back into the general fund from ESSER dollars, and all the scenarios repeated assume that. This also includes our debt payments for the construction of the Miller South and Pfeiffer building on the Kenmore campus. And it includes $15 million in cuts. To be clear, $15 million in reductions, 4% cut in our budget starting next school year. Okay, so it's next school year, all $15 million. So if you say, well, we'd rather phase it in, of course we can do that. But what that means is the 5-year forecast is going to flip by $6 million or $7 million or $8 million, whatever we don't cut. So that's important to keep in mind. So what you're looking at right now is our current 5-year forecast that is submitted to ODE right now. This is also the forecast that both Dr. Robinson and I, when we went to Chicago and presented as well. So you can see that on this 5-year forecast, when we started this out in November, in 2024, we were still not in deficit spending, but then you can see right across this line that says revenue surplus or deficit. So if you follow that across the page, you can see how we're moving into deficit spending, and it gets larger and larger and larger and larger. That is not unusual. We need to pay attention to it. We need to focus on it. We need to understand it. But like I said before, it's almost impossible because of House Bill 920 to prevent that from being reality at some point. The line below is our ending cash reserves. No levy here, Dr. Molnar. This is no levy on this. This is just us making those reductions, reallocating our resources to meet the needs of our students based on the blueprint for excellence and shifting things away. It's a process. You heard Dr. Robinson talk about it. But we stayed black all the way through our 5-year forecast, which was our goal. So where did $15 million come from? It was under the understanding that we wanted to have a 5-year forecast that stayed black for 5 years. Now, you also keep in mind what I mentioned earlier. Anything under roughly $60 million in cash reserves is a levy trigger. So again, look on that bottom line on the ending cash balance, and you can start to see if we overspend by a whole lot in 2026, $68 million could look different. Or if we're unable to make all $15 million in cuts, for example, those numbers would all change and look different. So this is with modeling, Dr. Molnar, with the levy passage. So this will let you see what that looks like. So this particular one, again, that 5-year forecast, base assumptions that we just went over, it includes a 1.7 mil PI levy. Those dollars would be used in this particular scenario, just used for general repairs, just general repairs across the district. There's an argument for that because everyone says, oh, we have all brand new buildings. Some of our older buildings are now pushing 20 years old when we started this process, when the district started that process. So if you, just like your home, you know when you hit that 20, 25-year mark, you know what's coming, right? The big expenditures that you hate to put into your house because they don't make it look any prettier, but they sure keep the drywall from getting wet when the roof is leaking, or the heater. It's nice to have a heater on when it's, I know it's pretty balmy here, Dr. Robinson. I'm sure you're enjoying the very warm temperatures of Ohio, but it's cold, obviously, right? And having that heating system is pretty important. So those are all things that we're facing as well, and it'll generate about $27 million in totality. Both of those combined is about a $27 million increase. This particular scenario would be, we do not rebuild North High School, okay? Do not rebuild North High School. So you can see here, go across, let's take a look at that revenue surplus number, okay? You can see that it never quite gets us out of deficit spending, even with a $27 million levy and $15 million in cuts. If you look across the bottom, it makes us much healthier in terms of our cash reserves, but we almost automatically go into eating those. So that's why I'm always concerned when we talk about a levy. I think it's important for our community, for our board, our administration to really understand that a levy doesn't just solve all of our problems. We're still going to have to remain very fiscally conservative. Yes, ma'am.
So my question now is, this is with a levy.
That's correct.
And you said that the average levy is about 4 years. This is a forecast of 5 years. The last levy was 12 years. So do we have an estimate of, is this telling us how long you think this levy would last, or how we came to that strategy?
Yeah, sure. So what this is telling us, there are some guardrails that are driving some of this. For example, one of the guardrails, of course, is the 5-year forecast. Another guardrail is the fact that there's a reality of how much capacity the community would have for passing a levy. So if we just ran numbers, that levy request would be higher. if we just ran numbers. So remember, $60 million, it'll be higher 5 years from now, but $60 million is 2 months in cash reserves. So look across the bottom. See where we're starting to get by 2028. So the first round in cuts of 15 million, what this is telling us is we have to watch very carefully because that might not be enough and pass a levy.
So if this is based on perceived community capacity, how did we determine that, what we thought the community,
Past
where did
levies,
that come
past
from?
levy amounts that had passed. So we looked at past levies, how much they asked for and what passed and what didn't. That's what it was predicated on. Yes, ma'am.
This number, the number went down again because you're back to 15 million, but the last 2 meetings ago, the number was increased from 15 million because 15 million was the original. And so where's the other couple million that increased? We're not recognizing that in this budget and forecast?
Well, at this point, we have to see how reallocating resources all works itself out at this point. So, you know, I think we're still in the process of understanding exactly how much we're going to spend and exactly how much we need to make in cuts to make these numbers real.
But the debt, as I was understanding, and please clarify, the debt that was added to the 15 million was real debt. 15 million, excuse me, was actual debt. Is that correct?
Well, I think what I'll show you in a minute is the monthly reconciliation, the monthly financial report, and in the monthly financial report, that'll tell us, well, how close are we to hitting these numbers? And you'll see that there's a variance there that's a negative variance. So what that tells you is if you see a negative variance in a monthly report, now it fluctuates month to month, and it's close. I mean, we're off by 0.3%, which is really good to be that close. But whatever number that ends up being at the end of the year, that's a number that we're going to have to reconcile. And so that could mean maybe it's 16.5 million and not 15 million to hit the same numbers. Does that make sense?
Not really, but that's okay because I can walk through. You know, I may need more
when
time.
we hit the monthly financial report, I think it'll come clearer. So we'll come to that.
Okay, and because what I'm saying is because numbers are quantitative, they're absolute numbers are right.
Sure.
And so I'm referencing the millions of dollars that we said that we were indebted to the city.
That's
That
correct.
came up, right?
That's correct.
It's not reflected.
That's not reflected in this 5-year forecast, but I am going to talk to you a little bit about that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
my question is, so when you get to that point, because either the number is absolute or it's not, because that's an absolute, that's not like salaries, which we know also because of that, the raises that we get, you know, after the result of the last negotiations,
Sure.
that impacted our budget.
Sure, of course.
So we know that salaries can fluctuate if people leave the district, things, so I know about that fluctuation. But when we're talking about a debt for capital improvements or for the swap of this building, that's an absolute number. So I don't know how that fluctuates unless some was forgiven, and if there's something else, so.
There are a few things in the works right now, and I'll get to that.
All right.
But what we're trying to accomplish, but you are absolutely right. There are some expenditures that came to us that we had no way of knowing, no way of forecasting for, that unless we can get those rectified in some way, which we have some pathways, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but if we are unable to get those rectified or at least mitigated to some degree, then yes, it absolutely impacts the 5-year forecast. And instead of maybe those numbers that you're reading across the bottom being what they are, maybe they're $2 or $3 million less each one and compounding over that 5-year forecast. So maybe, 71 million ends up being 64 million in that back end of the 5-year forecast. Does that make sense? So what you're seeing here is this is a levy with a purchase of North High School. So just keep in mind, I'm going to go backwards for just real quick. Look, remember that $71 million number. So if we divert funds from our PI just to North High School, how does that impact that $71 million in 2028 projection? So we assume the same thing. All these assumptions are the same. The only difference is here. This scenario includes construction of a new high school for $85 million in a COPS issuance, and that's roughly $5.5 million a year in annual debt payments to pay the COPS back to build North High School. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Okay.
Clarification on how did you decide to use COPS, the certification of participation, as opposed to bonds?
Well, the only difference is if we could seek a bond issue, but that would have us out for new money, PI money, and a bond issue, which clearly that's the board's pleasure. If we think we could pass all three of those, my recommendation would be not to do that, and that was the direction that the previous board had directed us to go towards. So that's why we're at. But it's subject to change. Yeah, so you could do a bond issue.
Yeah, and I'm just asking that because I think when we talk about this to the public at large, they're more familiar with bonds, and it seems safer, and it seems the way that government usually goes as opposed to COPS.
Yeah, there's no question. The difference between a bond issue and a COPS, to be sure, a COPS has nothing backing it to make the payment, but it doesn't take a vote of the community. A bond issue generates the revenue to make that payment, but requires a vote of the community. The reason that I personally am comfortable with this as a recommendation is because we added 1.7 mil PI levy. So it's a backwards way of moving into a bond issue, essentially. We're generating enough revenue, but all that PI money would be all eaten up by paying back the COPS. They're both low interest. They work similarly. It's just the mechanism of how you get the money's different. So
I'm just concerned that, as us, the elected people here, when we go out into the community and they ask us questions about this COPS thing is going to be a real kind of interesting explanation that we're going to have to be prepared to explain the difference. And you know how people, when you don't hear something normally and you start talking about something new and you didn't have to go to the public to get approval to do it, then what are we hiding?
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about.
All very true. All very true. There's the financial mechanism and the reasoning behind the financial mechanism, and then there's reality and politics too. That is also equally as important because you can't do one without the other. So there's no question. But the option for the board, which I could present to the board along with Dr. Robinson at any point if that's what you would like, we could not model a PI levy. We could model a bond issue if that's the board's pleasure.
No, I just want to bring that point out about COPS.
No, you're right.
Is that it's just something new for the community, and people tend to want to do things that they're more familiar with, especially when we're talking about millions and millions of dollars.
Sure, there's no doubt. Yeah. There's no doubt, and I think, what's that?
In our earlier discussions, earlier on.
Yeah.
I remember you going through the various scenarios as far as a bond and COP.
Yeah, I did.
Previous board, so
Right,
it's
right.
been presented, so.
Yeah, we did do that. No, I don't even remember. It's a whirlwind of when we did it, but
Yeah.
we did it last year.
And it may have been presented to the board, but it has not been presented to the public, the taxpayers.
That's true.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that's what's
He can
important.
pull it up.
Yeah.
That's all I'm
Yeah.
referencing, because he had a presentation, and he did it, I believe, even in a committee meeting.
Yeah, we
possibly.
probably
So
did.
I was just saying to expedite things, if you had your last slide show how you presented it, just to members.
Oh, no, I'm familiar with COPS.
No, the community, Ms. Sykes.
But I'm saying, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. I
Like,
know
you get
exactly
I'm
what you're saying.
That we have to come with a good explanation as to explaining why we're using cops over bonds. We got to come up with the,
Yeah.
as a system,
Yeah.
we have to explain this
Yeah.
so that people are comfortable with it and feel that this is, okay, this makes sense. That's,
You know,
Do you think we
That's
need
what
to
I'm
do
saying.
That's what I'm asking. Do you think that presentation would be advantageous again, like in this setting, so that for a reference point in lieu to us also having the knowledge, or just let's be ready and let's talk about it when we see people? That's all I'm asking. Should we have something like the presentation that was presented as far as the difference, so people have a reference point that we can refer the community to something, like how they can click on this if they come to this meeting, or
Or would that be something the levy committee would discuss when that is convenient?
No, I wouldn't recommend putting that in the hands of a committee of people. I think that's a board responsibility. I think it just, it probably is not going to hurt anything to have at least the presentation to you all as a reminder. Here's modeled what a bond issue would look like. Here's modeled what a PI levy and a COPS would look like. Make sure everybody understands the difference between the two. And you're absolutely point on, and at least in my experience, and I'm sure Dr. Robinson would probably echo the same thing, when you change things, it creates a whole new learning curve. And in my experience, the most difficult thing about school leadership is how do you effectively communicate. It's very, very difficult, to reach masses of people. That's hard to do. So when things change, people, you move somebody's cheese, we know how most people respond. And
Dr. Thompson, also, I remember it was mentioned, I think it might have been Dr. Molnar, possibly Ms. Autry, about just the fact, like a fact sheet, so that we can have so when the community comes to us, to Member Sykes' point, because that's what I was trying to get clear, because I like to be clear, because I don't want to be caught off guard and not know the facts, and I would love to have something to refer the public to as well, like, hey, if you go on our site, you click this. But I remember there was an ask about just the facts, so that we can have, to Member Sykes' point, where I can quickly explain it, or I can quickly direct someone to where to go. That's all I'm saying for clarification, because I just don't want I don't want to be fumbling.
Yeah, we absolutely need that. I know we need more details, though, as far as what a levy would cover or not cover. So that part hasn't been decided yet, but the basic information, yes.
So you would be getting that. That's kind of all a part of the levy process. That committee, the finance, so the board would have a fact sheet, not just for yourselves, but it would be something that the public would have access to, for everybody to understand just at a glance, like quick glance, so that you could be able to have that information for reference purposes.
yeah, no question.
But
That
Do we have a time frame and when we could expect that, just generally, because I know it was mentioned like maybe a few months ago when we first were talking about that. I'm just wondering where are we at in the stages of having something like that together.
yeah,
Do we know?
I couldn't tell you today, but what I could tell you is that it is something that we're going to make sure that you do have, and I would project to say maybe within a couple of months. after the review of finances and all of some other things, logistical things, because that's going to be in preparation of the levy. And of course, you know, we are not able to be involved in that process. So, but I do know that that is going to be done.
So, yeah, and to Dr. Robinson's point, part of what has to occur first, there's some dominoes that have to fall in order to create the fact sheet. One of them has to be the board passes the 2 resolutions to be on the ballot and what those amounts are. We could guess right now, but we don't know for sure what direction we're going in for in millage. That is a board decision. The administration makes a recommendation, surely, but you all make that decision. And I'm going to have to really fly here. If we're going to get there, we're probably not going to get through everything, and that's okay. But I'll quickly go through this. This is, remember I mentioned that in 2028, without a North High School, it was $71 million in cash reserves. And you can see here what happens in cash reserves with the build of a North High School. It eats into the cash reserves because we're taking all of the PI money, instead of using that PI money to deflect what would come out of general fund for a repair, would have come out of PI, but the PI money's gone because it's dedicated to servicing the debt for North High School. So, it's kind of, the administration, the board is kind of in a difficult position in that I don't think there's a lot of argument that we need a new North High School. I don't think you'll find a lot of argument against that. But at the same time, it's expensive, and how are we going to pay for it? So, those are just all the things that we have to wrestle with. And ultimately, we need to meet the needs of our students. And, I don't know that we're doing that the way we want to anyway at North High School right now, and just in terms of the physical building itself. So I want to hit real quickly. It was uploaded, your monthly financial report, and I'll do this fairly quickly. At any point, if anyone would like to, sorry. So you receive this report each month, and a couple of things for you to take a look at and kind of keep at the forefront. And you've seen it, it's uploaded on your documents. It's the very first page. It's a really comprehensive and pretty straightforward report of where we stand. And that first box is going to tell you, are we above projections or below projections on our current revenue? The middle box is going to tell you, are we above projections or below projections on our expenditures? And then the third box tells you where we stand with those two things commingled. Sometimes one can be good and one negative, or vice versa. Now remember, this changes monthly depending on when we get our tax receipts. Maybe there was a one-time expenditure that was paid for in a month that kind of really jacked up our expenses, but it's not reoccurring. So, you have the one-time expenditures, and then you have compounding expenditures. And obviously the compounding one is more difficult to, it just compounds itself. It's over and over, repeating itself. Versus that, maybe you get hit on a $500,000 for a security system, for example. So that month it looks skewed on the expenses, but then it evens itself out the next month, or starts to. So, but this gives you a great bird's eye view, and in that blue box to the right, that number, if it's unfavorable, those are the words that the report uses, favorable or unfavorable. If it is unfavorable, that's telling you that we're trending in the wrong direction in terms of our expenditures, not necessarily against the budget, although against the budget to some degree, but more directly, that's where the difference is between the budget and a 5-year forecast. That 5-year forecast was based on actuals.
Could that have been up there so for those who are watching at home, what's being, open our computers, could that be for them to view?
I don't have a way of doing that. One of the things that I am, it's, obviously I'm dashing dresser, as you can see. But what I am not is a computer whiz. As you saw Angela have to come up and show me how to forward slides. But what I will do is I'll work with the tech department and make sure I can pull these up at the next board meeting. Yeah. And so you can just go through we're running out of time, but you can go through this document. And what's also important is, so it'll tell you on that same page in the bottom if we have an operating surplus or deficit, and then it'll tell you why in that box right below. Pretty just straightforward, numbers-wise, here is why. So it's a good document for you as board members just to read through, and you can really be pretty abreast on what our financial picture looks like. And that should help you drive decisions as board members moving forward. So the next thing I wanted to update you on is we have two things with the city that are pretty important, pretty pressing right now. Of course, the not knowing that we were going to have to make $1 million payment each year on this facility. And we've talked about that in the past. That's certainly one. And then we had money in an account that is essentially left over from the construction of all the new buildings. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $16 million. That's the LFI money, the local funded initiatives. So the OFCC only pays for certain things. So if you want to go above and beyond that, make the gym bigger, make a theater, et cetera, then you have to produce those funds. And the district did that in conjunction with the city, but didn't expend it all, which is great. That money's still sitting there. So initially, Dr. Robinson and I had a couple of conversations with Mayor Horrigan and his staff, or I believe one actually, with his staff, and then some communication on the phone, and ended up with a certain arrangement with the city. And I met again with the finance director a month or so ago, before the new mayor had been seated, and the discussion was, let's hold off on the payments for this building. Let's hold off on how that LFI money might be distributed, what it might be used for, because our new mayor has different ideas, potentially would have different ideas than the previous mayor, which is not surprising. Everyone, kind of brings in their own thing. So it was an encouraging conversation. One of the things I talked about was, could we essentially take those payments for this building, for example, if we're locked into those, and there's some discussion that maybe it's not as rock solid as we had originally thought, that they might be willing to work with us on some debt relief, some other types of trades, or potentially spreading those payments out, thus reducing it. So maybe it's a combination of those things to try and reduce the burden of that payment that we didn't budget for. So I think there's a real desire to work collaboratively to try and resolve both of those situations in a way that works for both the city and the school district. We have a meeting coming up shortly with Steve Fricker, who is the finance director. He's continuing on from Mayor Horrigan's staff and will continue in the next administration, the current administration. And Mrs. Sykes will be joining Dr. Robinson and I don't know if we can have, I guess, 2 more board members if that's the desire, Ms. Autry. So, but let me know, and I'll make sure that you're scheduled in for that meeting, or whoever that might be that that would want to do that.
Yeah, and that's only if the president determines that I should be one of the people to participate.
Yeah, I should say, she inquired about having an interest in attending. So, so if you could let me know how that will go, but we are currently working out that meeting date. It's been tough because they're so busy. Yes, ma'am.
I know we're over on this. This is such an in-depth topic, though, of finance. For clarity, the LFI funds with the $16 million left over in the
Roughly
$16 million left in the account. The reason why I want to inquire about this is, are these the funds that we talked about almost a year ago, where the city, as far as how could we get some of that money, and the city was saying that they were going to take like $13 million?
Well, it was $8 million at that time. That was a split.
It was a split?
Yeah.
And then, okay, so we're back at this 6, where are we at with that?
Well, it's still sitting there because we don't need to access it quite yet. The whole all 16 million sitting there, and that's part of what we're going to have discussions with the city and the new administration about, well, what is the best way to do this? And the city does have some ideas of some things they would like us to do, and in lieu of taking as much money. Maybe give us more if you do this. Okay. So we're working through that to see if that makes financial sense for us.
And could we have, I think I like things in writing because, I recall these things and it seems like, it's a lot of wording and changes. So whenever you do have this meeting, could we have a report out in writing as far as what's discussed and what was determined? Because I bless God for my memory and that it doesn't fail me, but I realize if I'm just one person that's recalling these things, that doesn't really hold much weight except between me and the Lord. So I would like something written down because, as I understand, although there's a new administration, it was posited to this board, and again, I may be the only one that recalls this, that a decision was made with these LFI funds, and that the city was going to retain a certain amount as if that was certain and clear, and we would get the other. So then when I'm told the $16 million is there and we're going to figure it out, I'm a little troubled by that. So just if I can get things in writing.
Yeah, sure. So the conversation was, part of the reason for the meeting was to determine how we would access our $8 million, how we wanted that to work. And then at that point is when the city administration said, Steve, it might be in the district's best interest if you were to wait until the new administration is seated, because they might be willing to do something that's more advantageous for the school district. So I don't know what that is yet or not, but what we can certainly do is put it in the Friday update once we have a summary of that meeting and summarize it and send it in a Friday update. You're welcome. So those are the two things that we're working on with the city.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Before you move on, so just to clarify, because this is still in conversation, none of the city financial updates were included in the forecast.
Well, let's be very clear. That forecast is the same forecast from November and has not changed. So no, we did not know about that previous to November. So that 5-year forecast does not reflect payments for this building.
Because another conversation that I kind of remember when we first heard about paying more for this building than we thought is then we might have to do more cuts. So like the 15 million in cuts might turn into 18 million in cuts. So where is that?
Well, it wouldn't be quite that much. And again, I think we can mitigate. I think we'll be able to mitigate it, even if we have to make those payments. Maybe it ends up being $500,000 a year and not $1 million. And I'm not trying to downplay that dollar amount in any way because it's a substantial dollar amount. But remember, $500,000 isn't even 1% of our budget. So it's a pretty small percent of our budget. Not that it's not important and not that it doesn't impact the 5-year forecast, because it does. But I don't think it'll impact it substantially. At this point, I still feel like we're going to be able to navigate our way through that. is where I'm at right now. But we'll have a much clearer picture in May because we'll know where our cuts are and what they are by then. We'll have a better financial picture for the year because it's almost winding down. So our numbers are going to be much more solid, and each month our monthly report gets a little more clear, a little more clear, a little more clear. So when we do that May forecast, that's when we'll really get a clear picture on where we stand. So on that investment review, I just want to show you again, and I'll make sure that in future meetings I'm able to project this. But you can see in our general funds, we're yielding about 2.87%. Those construction funds, that LFI money, that's actually a solid number, which is not an estimate. It's almost 17 million now. It's $16,906,000. Our permanent improvement money at 17 million. Well, let me back up. Those construction funds are yielding 5.82%. I mean, right now is a great time to invest, whether it's a private investment or a business investment or a school district investment. You can see the yields we're getting on our permanent improvement, 5.39 on our benefits dollars that are earmarked for benefits. So what this tells you is we just don't take the money that we have and sit it in a bank. We're investing it, trying to generate revenue. So that's a great example of how we are functioning like a business. We're taking our cash reserves and we're making more money. So that also helps our 5-year forecast, might offset some of the things on our 5-year forecast because we didn't project as much revenue in our investments as I think we're going to have. So you might see our expenditures higher than what we anticipated, or you might see revenue, the expenditures higher, but we could get an infusion of cash from our investments that kind of offsets it. So again, too soon to know for sure right now, but we're trending only about 0.2% off of our projections right now. They're still large numbers, when you look at them, but overall, they're really not. So that's important to look at our investment. If you could, in the interest of time and not stealing so much time away from the next committee, and I apologize for that, our yearly, we produced a calendar for you, and I'm hearing things like you'd like to see the vehicle refresh plan, which Dr. Robinson talked about. There is a plan. It just got stalled. You got, in an effort to, and it's not unusual. You'll see that happen. I've seen it happen in lots of districts. I think Dr. Robinson will agree with this statement that the problem is it's penny wise, and the rest of it, dollar foolish sometimes when you put off that expenditure because you're going to pay for it a year or two down the road when you're buying twice as many buses because you went 3 years without buying buses, for example. Buses are expensive. Buses are now almost $150,000 a bus. I mean, it's crazy. It is expensive. Vehicles are expensive, especially dump trucks, and that was one of the things we purchased a few months ago when that was brought to you. We had to. It died. They died. The dice was rolled, and the vehicles didn't make it. And that just sometimes happens. I don't say that as a criticism to past administration. It happens all the time. It just didn't work in this particular instance. So if you could please review that. I know some things I'm going to add, and if you could send me an email, hey, Steve, we'd like to see such and such on. I'll respond to you and let you know. If there's some reason I think that's not a feasible thing, I'll let you know. But otherwise, if you don't hear that, I'll make sure it's on the calendar. And then finally, there is a board proclamation that was also uploaded for your review. And I think it's pretty good. I would like to take credit for it. I did absolutely nothing about writing it except asking Mark Williamson, to write it, and so Mark put this together for us. But this would require a board resolution, obviously. Additionally, just some things to think about it moving forward if we want to do this. Typically, we would take this and put this on some kind of nice parchment paper with, you know, symbols on it and whatnot. So we would do that. And then someone, whether it's an administration in combination with a board, typically would go to a city council meeting, for example, and present this at a city council meeting is typically how it's done.
Yeah, I think the mayor, I know the mayor is planning on having 2 more meetings, and I was thinking maybe our president could present it, or our vice president could present it in a public meeting, just to show our support for what they're doing.
Okay.
And to put our thoughts on.
So I'll just read it briefly or quickly. It says, whereas the Akron Public Schools Board of Education recognizes the importance of public safety and the role of the Akron Police Department in ensuring the safety and well-being of our community, and whereas the Board of Education acknowledges the need for a diligent and thorough search for the very best candidate for the job, one who will set a good example for children and apply the law evenly for everyone in our community, and whereas establishing a plan for equitable crime reduction takes courage and more than status quo leadership. On the community side, equitable outcomes mean that the development or deployment should afford all neighborhoods a chance to lower crime and improve the quality of life to a similar level throughout the entire jurisdiction. Whereas the Board of Education recognizes the efforts of the City of Akron in engaging with the community in this process, including issuing a community survey in English, Nepalese, Spanish, and Arabic, and making that accessible to all of our community surveys, and hosting a community town hall to gather feedback on January 11th, 2024. I believe that's already actually scheduled, with plans to host 2 more once final candidates for the position are identified. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Akron Board of Education supports the City of Akron's hiring search for a new chief of the Akron Police Department, and encourages all members of the community to participate in this process by filling out the community service and attending the town hall meetings. So that if there's some changes that you would like, again, please let me know, and we'll get those edited. But otherwise, when I read it, I thought it was pretty on point based on what I believe was the will of the board. Anything else? Okay. So with that being said, are there any questions? Look at that. Well, that was some good stuff right there, wasn't it? See how that faded like that? I don't know how that happened, actually. Any questions for me?
There's no more questions. Thanks,
Okay.
Dr. Thompson.
Okay, thank you all so much.
So this ends the meeting for the Finance and Capital Management Committee. Thank you.